95% of your behaviors, the things that you do every single day, 95% of those decisions come from your subconscious. Anxiety is a symptom of identity shifting. A lot of times we don't act until we're in a crisis. That stops now. So as your coach, I'm talking to God about you. I'm not just talking. You're not just talking to God, and I'm not just talking to God. I'm talking to God about you. Let go and let God. Like, it means so much, but no one ever explains it. Let go, let God, because God's going to give you your replacement. This is do I want to say interesting topic? Not that it's interesting, but it's very much so real. It's very much so necessary. We see a lot of chat about identity shifting in the spiritual realm of coaching and content. Like, when I say spiritual, I mean those who believe in some other God or believe in the universe or some other thing or whatever, right? We see a lot of like manifestation, law of attraction, law of assumption, right? Now, there is some overlap. I paused when I said that because I don't want y'all to think there's like gray area. God is God, okay? When you're talking to me, God is God. And when you're listening to me, God is God. God is not the universe. He is the creator of the universe. I kind of had like this similar conversation this morning in a group coaching session. We kind of talked about like there are certain things that you search on the internet and you can find like that term or that thing exists in spiritual coaching, but you can't find it if you put in like faith-based coaching. And one of those things is identity shifting. And the Bible talks a lot about identity. So I just cannot seem to understand why my people, my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, and the rest of y'all I'm still calling y'all my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. I don't care what you think you are. Okay. I'm still calling y'all that. I just don't understand why we are not associating identity shifting or shifting your identity and becoming a new person with Christianity and faith-based. Like, that's a little disturbing to me. Okay. Because like I said, there is a lot in the Bible about identity, and I do have my Bibles open, both my Bibles. I have 2 Bibles. I have both of them open because we're going to read a little bit together today, later on in this episode. But yeah, welcome in, y'all. Welcome to my This is not a podcast. Still have not named it. I am not wanting to call it a podcast, not willing to call it a podcast. I refuse to be put in the same category as Kevin Samuels. God rest his soul. I refuse to be put in the same category as him. I refuse to be put in the same category as every African-American male in their 30s or 40s that is now finding their voice through a $50 podcast they bought at Best Buy. I'm not. Y'all not gonna put me in the same category as them. This is not a podcast, okay? This is just a sit-down conversation with me. I am not giving you love relationship advice. It is not happening. I am not teaching you from bullet points like I do on the business side of my business, because I am a business coach as well. I'm not sitting down and teaching you. We're having a real conversation about things that matter, and I don't care what type of relationship you're in. I do not care what kind of car you drive. I do not care how much revenue your business is making and how many degrees you have. This is about you. This is about life, and this is about where you are going in the future. Point blank, period. This is not a podcast, okay? Not a podcast. That's my spiel for today. I'm done with my spiel for today. Let's jump into this identity shifting, but let's start by pulling up the dictionary and looking at the definition of what is identity shifting. Merriam-Webster. I'm going to get me a physical dictionary because I love physical books. Actually, identity shifting as a concept does not exist in the dictionary according to this search. It is giving me other options though, like identity theft, identity crisis. But you know what? Let's look at identity crisis. An identity crisis is defined as, according to Merriam-Webster, a personal psychosocial conflict, especially in adolescence, that involves confusion about one's social role and often a sense of loss of continuity to one's personality. The second definition says this: a state of confusion in an institution or organization regarding its nature or direction. Now, by that definition, you may be saying to yourself right now, wow, I am in an identity crisis. Well, guess what, girl? You watching the right video, okay? You may be in an identity crisis. A lot of y'all are in an identity crisis. And based off of that definition, I'm going to say a strong 50 or more percent of the clients I talk to are in an identity crisis. Now let's look at identity shifting, or let's look at the definition of shifting. Shifting means to exchange for or replaced by another. It also means to change the place, position, or direction of, or to change phonetically. I love that. Identity shifting. I know that we are trained to use the word crisis only when there's like an immediate danger or an immediate threat to our physical safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety. If you're really in tune with your spirit, spiritual safety, right? But a lot of times we don't act until we're in a crisis. That stops now. We're not doing that anymore. Like, let's stop only waiting until we're in crisis to take action. This is why I serve women of color specifically, because our culture is taught to act only in situations of crisis, because we've experienced so much crisis in our history. And that means in your history, that means in the history of your parents, in the history of your grandparents, because when you're experiencing this continuing generational crisis and it's being passed down, even if you never met your parent, father or mother, even if you've never met your grandparent or grandmother, maternal or paternal, you are inheriting their subconscious and that subconscious process. So I don't want to get too deep with y'all, but if something happened to your grandparents and they experienced something that was crisis, right? Considered a crisis, which is also traumatic, then often what we see in psychology shows us that if you experience something traumatic, then you are changed sometimes on a subconscious level, even sometimes down to a cellular level. So your DNA is now altered based off of that experience. So if you are realistically you are. If you are half of your mom and half of your dad, and your mom or your dad has experienced trauma that has changed their perception of life subconsciously, then you are inheriting that DNA. Like, not saying that you think the same way as your mom does or you think the same way as your grandmother does, because you probably don't. But on a subconscious level and on a cellular level, like if we look at their DNA and your DNA, it is going to be very, very similar. So there are some things that you inherit that you consciously don't have any control over whether or not you inherited them. But now that you are aware or have been made aware, you are able to intentionally change your conscious, then your subconscious, and then your DNA so that you do not pass those things on to your children. Now, if you've already had children, it's too late for you to change on the DNA level because they're already here. But if you're aware, you can make them aware. And the sooner they become aware, the more time they have in their life to rewire, rewire their subconscious and change that perspective that they may have inherited on life. Now, if you listen to the last episode, we talked about how a lot of behaviors are learned behaviors. This is the part that is not learned behavior, okay? The things that make up, like the elements and the aspects that make up what you do, are your subconscious and your conscious. 95% of your behaviors, the things that you do every single day, 95% of those decisions come from your subconscious. Learned and inherited subconscious. You also have learned and inherited conscious, okay? Like if you go to school to learn something, you are consciously showing up to school to learn something. You also may go to school and consciously inherit. So let's say, I'm in the library. I see someone else who's in the library all the time. I'm going to now start coming to the library every time that person comes to the library. That is you consciously inheriting. right? Like, I'm going to inherit this. So there's learned and there's inherited conscious, there's learned and there's inherited subconscious. Okay. Now, I explained all of this to say that when there is a deviation between what you have inherited and what you've known to be true in your subconscious for so long and what your current reality is, that's where the identity crisis comes into play. And as women of color, because we experience so much crisis, subconscious and conscious, sometimes we become numb and we're like regulated to it. So like things will happen in your life and you'll be like, oh, that's normal. And like, really, it is not normal. But you are so accustomed to seeing it, like to seeing those things, that you think, oh, this is not a crisis. When I was, how old was I? I was in my early 20s, maybe 22. Was I 22? Might have been 22. I worked for AmeriCorps. And I worked for the portion of AmeriCorps called City Year. So there's the Peace Corps, which a lot of people know. Then there's AmeriCorps, which does similar work to Peace Corps, but we do it inside of the United States. We need more AmeriCorps people, okay? So AmeriCorps, and I work for City Year, which specifically targets the educational sector of what's going on in America today. So we're placed in inner city schools that have high dropout rates, low graduation, all of that kind of stuff. And we work alongside the teachers as teachers' aides and partners in the school and in the community, because there's a lot of community service that goes into this job as well, and in the community to just assist. Like there's just so much there's so much need there that it's like, just get a warm body in there and we'll figure it out. Like, so when I was 22, I worked there. And when I was there, I saw a lot of things that I have never seen in my life. And one coworker in particular, she witnessed someone get shot. Well, I don't think she witnessed the shooting part of it, but she witnessed the person dying, like while waiting for the ambulance. And that was like, that's crisis mode. Like for someone who's never seen that before, like even me just going to work the next day and being like, where is so-and-so? I'm not going to say her name, but where is so-and-so? And like, oh, she experienced a traumatic event yesterday. She'll be back to work in a few days. By the way, she'll be back to work in a few days sounds really insane to me right now. Like I'm laughing because I laugh at chaos. Like laughing is my response to chaos. But it's like, what do you mean she's going to be back to work in a few days? She just witnessed somebody die from a GSW while waiting for the ambulance. What do you mean? Like, so, but to her, that was crisis. To me, even hearing the story was crisis because I've never experienced that before. But to the people that lived in that community, like, they were probably just like, yo, people die every day, B. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they were probably just like, it was sad, of course, especially if you knew the person, but a lot of them were probably so accustomed to seeing death at that level and in that proximity that they were just like, this is not crisis, right? So we kind of, as people of color, there's a lot of things that are that intense that we consider to be not crisis. Like, this is not a crisis. And so identity crisis falls into that category of, okay, at what point do we stop saying this is normal? Or at what point do we even realize like that this is a crisis? So I loved that we had to kick it off with reading this definition, because you may be experiencing identity crisis, and we're talking about identity shifting today, but the bulk of what I'm going to give you today is symptoms that you are in the middle of a shifting of identity. You may not have noticed that you were in an identity crisis, but these things are going to tell you you're in the middle of an identity shifting, because you can very much so move from crisis to shifting, not knowing it. And what moves you? God moves you from crisis to shifting, because he knows what you need and he's going to deliver what you need when you need it. And you may not even realize that things around you are moving. Like, you just know that you're uncomfortable, but you don't understand that things are moving around you. And so this is going to give you some good stuff on that. So identity crisis involves confusion about one's social role. You're confused in your social role. Like, where do I stand? What's happening right now? And then a sense of loss of continuity with your personality. So it's a sense of loss. So you do, on an emotional level, feel like something is off here, something's not right, but it's a sense of loss of continuity with your personality. It happens at different phases of your life. And spiritually, people who are not faith-based, it seems like they relate this to the stars and the moon and the ocean and no, there are just major life events that happen at different times of your life. And so I can't even tell you like age ranges. I'm gonna give you some anyways, but it honestly does not make any sense for me to say these are times in your life where you may be experiencing or you are going to experience an identity crisis, according to this definition, and it's going to be correct. For some of y'all, it's going to be way off. Like, if you grew up in a community where you saw someone die at the age of 9, or you saw someone die in middle school, you saw someone die in high school, your numbers for identity crisis are going to be off, because when you are faced with harsh realities of life earlier on in childhood, your identity crisis happen at different times. It just is, okay? It just does, because you're snapped out of childhood a lot sooner. So for you guys who grew up in communities where violence was normalized, or if you grew up in a community, or maybe you grew up without community, like if you grew up without parents, or if you grew up as, or without one or the other parent or both parents, if you grew up in a home, like you had parents, but you grew up in a home with like your grandparents, your identity crisis is going to happen at a different age range. But typically, identity crisis normally happens somewhere in the teenage years, somewhere in your teenage to 20s, and then somewhere in your like 20s to 30s, somewhere in your mid 30s, somewhere in your 50s, like the midlife crisis. Okay, so those are like the general age ranges, but honestly, it really depends on your life. And this is why it is really good to have a life coach when you're thinking about how you're going to progress. Now, if you're still thinking about the past, and I give this disclaimer every episode, if you are still thinking about the past and you're still trying to process things that have happened to you in the past and kind of like make things make sense, then you probably just need a therapist. And you do not have to be in crisis to have a therapist. You do not have to be in crisis to need a life coach or a mindset coach or peak performance coach, whatever you want to call it, right? You don't need to be in crisis in order to have that. You should actually have that person on your team and have that person on your side before you get to crisis, because then you'll never be in a crisis. Because like they're going to catch you and say, hey, wait a second, we're going down the wrong street, right? So that is my disclaimer. If you need a therapist and or if you need a life coach, by the way, if you're a therapist, because I'm not a therapist, I am a coach. If you're a therapist for women of color and you would like to drop your information in the state in which you practice in the description box, in the comments below, you are welcome to do so, okay? For all my women who are watching this video looking for a therapist, please make yourself known if you are a therapist who works specifically with women of color, because the culture is different and the culture plays a major fact. Now, the definition of shifting to exchange for or replace by another. So when you are in a shift, it feels uncomfortable because one thing is being replaced with another thing. That's why. If it was just one thing going away and there was no replacement, then we consider that to be loss, okay? So loss is when something goes away and it does not get replaced. But when something goes away and it gets replaced with something else, that is called a shift. Okay, so number one, if nothing in your life, or if one aspect of your life does not feel right, like it used to be aligned, but now you've kind of like lost interest, or it just feels off, you are likely experiencing a identity shift. And if you are feeling any of these things, even with this symptom, right? If you're feeling any of these things, it's most likely because you have not identified what that replacement is, And you need to consciously say, this is the replacement to complete the shift. Do y'all understand that? So if you're in the middle of the shift, right? Because what happens is if you have not identified that replacement, it feels like loss. But it doesn't have to be loss. It feels like loss because you have not identified the replacement. Identify the replacement consciously, and that makes the shift complete. Because once you identify the replacement, then you can say, okay, I'm going to let this thing go, and this thing over here is my new thing. Okay? When we say in the faith world, when we say God has made you anew, you have to let go in order to complete that shift. If you have not let go, the shift is not complete, and it's still going to feel like you're at loss, or it's going to feel like you're living in between two worlds, because you are living in between two worlds. Okay? So baby, you have been made anew. Let go. Consciously state what your new replacement is going to be. Okay? Like the phrase let go and let God, let go and let God, like it means so much, but no one ever explains it. Let go, let God, because God's going to give you your replacement. You understand that too? You can consciously say what the replacement is, like, and I would say it out loud. Like, I am letting go of this and I am replacing it with this. And then making sure that your words and your actions and your thoughts and the way you think about yourself lines up with that conscious replacement, and you letting go of that thing, or letting go of that person, or that behavior, or that portion of your identity, that makes that shift complete. But let go, let God. God may say, this is your replacement. Actually, he is going to say, this is your replacement. But sometimes we don't hear that clearly. Sometimes we hear it, but we don't believe it. We're like looking for the sign. Like, I'm looking for the sign, Like, the sign is in your face, sis. This is why you need a coach. The sign. The coach is going to say, this is a sign. Psst. I know you have a lot going on in your life right now, but I'm just letting you know, as your coach, this is your sign. Like, I'm just going to reconfirm what I'm already seeing, which is why it's important, if you are focused on living a faith-centered life, a God-centered life, that you have a faith-centered coach or a God-centered coach. Because you're not just talking to God, and I'm not just talking to God. I'm talking to God about you. Okay? So as your coach, I'm talking to God about you, and I'm going to God when I feel like you should go to God. I'm going to tell you should go to God. And when you come to me, I'm going to run to God too. Right? So it's like giving you double coverage. But if you're feeling like nothing in your life, or even if it's just one thing in your life just like doesn't feel right and it used to feel right, identity shifting, it's happening. Okay. Number 2, if you had some things that were like established things, so that were in your life, whether that's people or just something that happens consistently, and those things are starting to look different. So like, you had a boyfriend, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't see us the same way I used to see us, or I don't see you the same way. I don't see our relationship the same way. Like, that's an identity shifting. Or sometimes it's yourself, and you're like, I don't see myself the way I used to see myself. I look in the mirror and I see something different. Like, what's happening? And it feels like loss because you haven't identified the replacement. Consciously identify the replacement. Okay, if I don't feel like myself, if I feel like I'm losing myself, let me consciously say, this is who I'm going to be, and then make sure that my thoughts and my actions and my beliefs and my prayers are in alignment with that. I'm going to let go of who I used to be and let go of that old identity, and the shift becomes complete. Okay? So it happens when things start to look different, or people start to look different than what they used to look like, or when people start to react differently than they used to react. It's also an identity shifting, okay? And I said boyfriend, and I said self, but there's so many other things. Like, there's so many other relationships between you and other people, relationships between you and passions, and you and your interests and your hobbies, and all these different aspects of life, even down to like your career. I'll leave the 6 areas in the chat there. I mean, in description box: health, finance, career, spirituality, relationships, and love. Okay? Relationships I took out. Relationships is like non-love related. Then you have love. Okay? So those are your 6 areas. Those are the ones that I look at when I'm coaching, and I'm like, okay, let's dig a little bit deep. Let's pinpoint what is happening, because you can have an identity shift in any of those 6 areas. And when you start that shifting, you don't necessarily know what area it is until you dig deep into it. And that's what happens during a life coaching session, is we dig deep to find out, okay, what is it that you're feeling? Like, what is the byproduct of what you're feeling? How is that affecting you in your life? Okay, now let's pinpoint where this is coming from. Let's make a decision. Like, how do you want to move forward? And I'm not telling you how you want to move forward. You're telling me how you want to move forward, and I'm guiding you to solidify that decision and to just reaffirm what God has already told you to do. That's literally what I'm doing. That's why I have to go to God about you. If you're my client, that's why I have to go to God about you, because I'm supposed to be reaffirming what he's saying. I can't do that if I didn't have no conversation with him about you, okay? So the established things and people in your life suddenly start to look different, okay? Then we have the third one, okay? Number 3, if you're feeling anxious or antsy, anxiety is a sign of identity shifting. So I mean, I just feel like we live in a generation where we like put a label on everything, and anxiety is very much so real. It is a real thing, because you can feel anxiety and you can feel very anxious and be hooked up to a monitor, and your body will start to exude symptoms of anxiety. And you can very much so mentally put yourself into fight or flight mode. And that is what anxiety is. It's like you're telling your body, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. You're thinking that your body is now manifesting these like physical attributes like sweaty palms, increased heart rate. Anxiety is real, okay? Anxiety is a symptom of identity shifting. It is very important that you take anxiety seriously in the form of talking about identity shifting, okay? Because you do not want to live your life anxious. You do not want to live your life with anxiety for long periods of time, because if you do, remember what we said, when you are living your life in a state of anxiety all the time, that starts to become a part of your subconscious. And when it gets into your subconscious, that now opens up the door for your DNA to change on a cellular level, and your kids can inherit anxiety. And if you've already had them, this does not apply, remember, because their DNA, they already got their DNA from you. They're gone, right? They're out of the womb. But you being aware of anxiety being a real thing and anxiety being a symptom of identity shifting now means that you can make your kids aware sooner. So when you are experiencing high levels of anxiety, 100%, it's always identity shifting. I mean, I was going to try to like break it down and like tell you guys it's okay. And anxiety doesn't always mean that you're identity shifting, but it does. It always means that you are worried about the future. That's literally what it is. You are either worrying about the past, you're worrying about the present, or you're worrying about the future. And if you were secure in your identity and you knew what you were letting go of and what you were consciously choosing to be and who you were consciously choosing to be and what you were consciously choosing to do, you would not have anxiety. Like, that's what that is. So make sure that if you are feeling a sense of anxiety, whether it's I had a 2-second feeling or I had a 20-minute feeling, or I've been feeling this way for 2 years, that you really sit back and start to look at, what is it that I'm living in between? Like, who is it that I feel like I was, and what's now changing in my life that is causing me to feel these things? What is it that you need to let go of? And what is it that you can consciously say, this is my replacement, because I need to complete this shift. You're not meant to live in between two different. It's not meant to be like that. That's why it feels so uncomfortable. That's why your body is literally saying, go, fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. That's why it's saying that, because it's throwing you these signals and these signs like, make a decision so that we can relax. And it starts to influence your brain. And I do understand that if you've had anxiety for quite some time, that you may need medication, but complete the shift and you won't need the medication anymore. Complete the shift. Now I'm gonna tell y'all this disclaimer. I'm not a proponent of like medication anyways. Like, I do not like taking medicine. I feel like if it's medicine that is going to solve the problem, that's one thing. But if it's medicine to ease and alleviate symptoms, that's a completely different thing. Okay. And I do like, when you're deep into something, sometimes you need medicine to ease the symptoms so that you can literally regain your focus. And so if you are taking medicine, do not take it with this is some really strong advice I'm about to give y'all. Somebody's probably going to get on my head top about this. If you are taking medicine, don't take it for the long term. Like, don't take it thinking I'm going to take this for the rest of my life. Take it until you can get to the point where you need to get to, and then let it go. Like, medicine is really not long-term solution oriented. It's not. Because if you take it for a lot of these medicines, if you take them for a really long time, you start to get these side effects that cannot be reversed. That's how you know it's not meant for long-term consumption. So if you have to take it, I'm not against medicine. If you have to take medicine for certain things, like, take it so that you can get to the point where you're like, okay, my head is like barely above water, but let me try to figure this out right now. Let me get to the root of this. Okay, let me peel back these layers. And sometimes it happens with a therapist, and sometimes it happens with a coach, depending on where you are, right? If you're still living in the past, you need a therapist. If you're focused on the future, you need a coach. But take the time to intentionally peel back the layers so you can get off the medicine. Like, think about it that way, okay? 1, it's super expensive. 2, a lot of it is addictive. I mean, I could give you a million reasons, but use it until you don't need to use it no more. Right? Use it till you don't need to use it no more. So that's your third, okay? The last one I'm going to give you is, if you have, and this is going to be a really obvious one, but for some of you, maybe it may not be obvious, but if you have recently stepped into a new found or a new depth of spirituality, if you have decided, I'm going to walk closer with God, or I'm going to dig deeper into what my relationship with God looks like, or if you have experienced a spiritual earthquake, these are good. Sometimes these are good. Sometimes these are bad. Okay. Everything has a purpose, but spiritual earthquake, meaning something has happened in your life that has shaken your spirituality to the core. Some of you, this is church hurt and church trauma. Sometimes it's something that's happened to you in church a long time ago, and now it's coming back. For whatever reason, there's been a trigger and it's back. Some of you, I had a near death experience and I had a spiritual earthquake. I call those spiritual earthquakes. You are likely, if you have experienced a spiritual earthquake, you are likely in an identity shifting. You're in between letting go of something old and adopting something new. And if you live in between those worlds, if you live in between those two identities for a long time, you will live in a confused state. And you may be able to function. A lot of y'all are functioning in an identity crisis, like high functioning. Like, I'm going to work, I'm hitting all my sales numbers, I'm doing good, I'm providing for my children, my bills are paid, I'm in a flourishing relationship. But there's some things in my life that feel off, and you are sweeping them under the rug. And those are the signs that God is sending you, that the Holy Spirit is sending you. Your body is literally, like anxiety, your body is literally sending you signs that there's an identity shift that's happening, and you need to complete that shift. And you're ignoring it because you don't realize it's a crisis. It's very much so a crisis, right? So when you're in that, like, that transition of like stepping into a new spiritual path, or I don't even want to call it a path, but when you've experienced a spiritual earthquake, and you said, I am going to change my life. Okay? That's the middle of an identity shifting. So for you guys that have been baptized, like in adulthood, you've been baptized, you went through that identity shift where you are letting go of old habits. You were letting go of old friends. You were letting go of old addictions. You were letting go of old behaviors. And you had to consciously say, and that's what a baptism is. It's you consciously saying, I am giving my life to God. It's you saying, I am the identity shift. I'm making it right now. It's not complete when you get baptized. Like, the real work happens after you get baptized, because that's when you have to go back and let go of all the stuff. Okay? That's when you really have to let go of all the stuff and assume or step into that new identity. And it's easy at first. It's so easy. It's like, I'm not smoking no hookah. I'm not drinking. I'm not hanging out with so-and-so. I'm not frivolously spending my money. Because listen, money is not bad, but irresponsibility and lack of stewardship in all 6 of those areas I just gave you. Like, it is very easy to say, I'm going to save and build this amazing life and read my Bible every day. So easy. But when it's time, it's easy to say it, but when it's time to really let go of all that stuff and fully step into it to the point where, like, you don't even recognize that old stuff anymore, that's when the work starts. That's when the work starts, okay? So if you're listening to this today or tonight or whenever you're listening to this and you have realized now, oh my goodness, I have been in an identity crisis for weeks or months or years. I've been in an identity crisis. And now that I understand, I'm getting into shifting my identity and experiencing an identity shift. This is your sign to complete the shift. And I guess this means that I need to do another episode on letting go. Because the first step is consciously saying, right? Like the first step is awareness. Awareness. Hello. Hi. You are now at awareness. Welcome. This is your first step. Then you go into consciously stating, then you go into letting go, and then your thoughts, actions, prayer life, and all of that, completes that shift. So it is a process, right? And it is a process that you can do with a coach. It is a process that you can start with a therapist. But it's a process that you can do with a coach. And I highly encourage you guys to seriously look into life coaching. If you're watching this video, I know it's weird because you may be like, I'm in my 20s. Why do I need a life coach? I'm in my 30s. Why do I need a life coach? I'm in my 40s. Why do I need a life coach? There's always going to be a question of why do I need a life coach? Oh, if your life is not going where you want it to go and you are not currently where you want to be, you, ma'am, are in need of a life coach. Okay. You are in need. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put those steps that I just explained to you guys into a downloadable PDF document, and you guys can go to the description box below and grab that for the free skis. Okay. That's my gift to you for this episode. But I really enjoyed having this conversation, this talk. Please, please, please leave any questions that you have at any point during this video. If you had any questions that you wrote them down or you thought about them, please leave them in the comment section, because I would love to do a Q&A video where I dig a little bit deeper. I said I was going to pull out my Bible in this episode. I didn't even get to it. So it's going to be a separate video because we're deep into this thing now. So I'm going to do a separate Bible study video where I kind of take you through just some really good verses that you need to go read if you are feeling like you're in the middle of an identity shift or an identity crisis, or you are actively working on shifting your identity. All right. That is all I have for y'all today. See you later. Bye, y'all.